Thank you, 4.
Thank you,
Thank you,
3.
3.
Thank you, 2.
Thank you, 3. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, 2. Thank you, 1.
With intros, I'm going to start your way, Misha.
I'm sorry?
I'm going to start your way, by the way.
Oh, God. Seriously?
Yeah.
You're ready. You got this.
I'm fine with that.
I don't know.
100%. I was like, that's fine. Misha goes first.
Yeah.
Misha?
Because we're new best friends.
Misha.
Misha.
Yeah.
Wait, who are we watching? HEB. Oh, Texas.
Oh.
Hello and welcome to Thank You 5 Chicago edition. We're here at Burke's Pub talking about theater. We'll start first with introductions. I'm Johnard Washington. I'm going to be hosting tonight. Strawdog, company member, actor here in the Chicago area. And then we're going to travel this way to...
Mikhail Fixel or Misha Fixel. I am a Strawdog Emeritus member, and I'm a sound designer here in Chicago and kind of all over. And yeah, I think that's it for now.
I'm Heather Gilbert. I am a lighting designer, and I've never been asked to be part of Strawdog, but I've lit a bunch of shows for them. From the 90s till the teens, and I love them very much. And I also work in Chicago and wherever else I can get a good job.
Yes.
Amen.
Hi, I'm Ellie Maitland, and I'm a Chicago-based theater artist. I've been friends with Strawdog for years now. I'm just used to hang out in their attic a lot back in the old days. My work these days is predominantly as a designer, choreographer, and performer for live Foley work in radio theater on stage.
I'm Becca Holloway. I have no connection to Strawdog whatsoever. But tonight's the first. It's a debut. It's my Strawdog debut.
Welcome.
I'm a freelance director and casting director. I'm involved with Factory Theater as well as Red Theater.
Woo! All right, and now we're going to hit some questions. The first question, very general. What is theater? What is theater to you? What does theater mean to you guys? And there doesn't have to be a particular order. If you have that burning desire, just give it a go.
Well, I feel like it starts with a performance, right? Theater is inherently a performance. For me, I think an audience is needed, but the size of the audience doesn't matter. If it's an audience of one and there's one person on stage, that's still theater.
I'd say those are the most important parts. Definitely, I'd say that it's collaborative storytelling that occurs in real time, live, so both the audience and the performers are sharing space and are able to exchange energy through the course of the storytelling task or project.
Oh, wait, you don't answer. It's me next. It's funny. I guess there's been a lot of thought about this, right, in the last few years. I have always said that the most important thing about theater is that it's an art form that's predicated on two people being in the same room together. And I've thought a lot. I had to cheerlead a lot. I should also say I'm an educator. I'm a college professor. And I have done that for a long time. And I had to cheerlead a lot during COVID to talk to my students about like why theater would survive and why I believed it would survive. And I guess for me, part of that was also the idea of like thinking about people sitting around a fire and telling that story, one person to another, and that somebody would stand up and be like, and then this is what happened. And to me, that is theater, right? When somebody embodies part of that story. And that's it, two people and one person embodying a story.
Yeah, I would add to that I, too, at the very beginning, earlier, a few years ago, if you would ask me that, it would be all those things. It is a live, shared space. But I think in the last several years, it has opened up for me to a lot of things. And I think at the core of it, I think it still needs to be a communal experience in some shape or form. And though theater, I think, still wants to have at least be informed by a live embodiment and the sort of the collaborative storytelling, I think the work of a theater company, maybe I'm just opening up a whole other question, could be a much broader range of activities beyond just what we've used to think of theater, which is a stage, an audience, and a real-time story, essentially.
Yeah, I really like that. I think I mostly agree with what you said about theater, where it's something that takes at least two people, and I would say an audience. And I think it has to, in some way, affect you enough that it removes you from wherever it is you are to that place that you're being asked to go, in these how many ever hours or minutes, to just examine what that story is. And I think, with this question, I have like this underlying desire to ask, like, well, more specifically, what is good theater? Like, I think maybe because I'm getting older, where it's like, what, I was talking about this, with Becca a little bit earlier. Like, what is it? What do I commit my time to? Your crafts, your gifts to, and I really think that shapes what it is people go and see, if that makes sense, or like what it is. If a theater company is dedicating itself to musicals, or this particular kind of story, I'm going everywhere right now, but like I'm very curious as to what you guys think. What makes good theater, or what makes a story worth telling? Period.
Well, I hope this doesn't count as a non-answer, but one of the things that I always want to say about any art in general is only the top 10% of any art of any discipline is probably any good, but that 10% is different to everyone, which is why it's so important that we have every voice possible adding to that conversation.
Yeah.
So I do think it's
Absolutely.
about like when it comes to theater that speaks to me, that's also something I think I'm in my mid-40s, and so I've been learning the language of narrative and of story conventions in a Western context for 40-something years now. And we're in a really interesting part of like our cultural movement right now, because stories become canonized and cliche so much faster because they're able to be distributed so much faster than they ever were before because of the internet, and because we can have the exact same version of a story replicated that fast for an infinite audience. And so the things that we're going to be curious about and see for the first time ever are going to be fewer and further between the longer we stay beholden to Western narratives.
Nice.
Dang.
Yeah, I don't want to go now.
I know.
Oh, no.
Well, I think, I personally think, and I don't want to use the word should, but I think theater really, in its oldest sense, spoke to a community. And I think also the older that I get, that I do want to see that. I want to see theater that is speaking to me, to what is actually happening right now. Now, you can do a show that was written 100 or so years ago, and make it work for now. So I don't necessarily mean contemporary plays, but I do like it personally when a show is commenting on things that are weighing heavy on us as a society right now.
Yeah.
If you are clever in your production, you are not hitting me over the head with an answer, but certainly you're speaking to something that in my everyday life, I may just be like, what the fuck? Where do I go from here? What am I to do with this thing that is an issue, or you know, there are universal things like love, loss, death, blah 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 blah. But like, how do I deal with something real?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think good theater, like good art, makes you feel things, makes you want to talk about things. But what makes theater separate, or at least different from art, is that shared space, right? Like breathing the same air and, you know, having your hearts beat at the same tempo when you're together, because you don't get to have very often conversations or interactions with the artist that made some piece of art, and you rarely get to have that in a film. But theater is this shared experience where you're together, and like Ellie, you were saying earlier about like vibing off of the energies in the room, and I think that is inherent to something that is specifically theater.
I guess then, because one of the first things I would think would be that theater does have major visual components, and so there is that same like kind of communal rush when people in an art museum are looking at a piece of art together. So I guess one of the major factors that makes something theater versus visual art would be living participants.
Yes. Yes, I love that. I love that. All right.
What about puppets?
I love a puppet. Who's controlling the puppets? Aha!
No. I mean, all jokes aside, I think the reason why I brought up puppets because I'm a big fan of what puppetry embodies as an idea. It's a great example of everybody in the room, whenever a puppet is involved, makes a contract with themselves and with each other that we're gonna imbue this inanimate object with life for the duration of this. It's an agreement of make-believe, but also of not to get all Tinkerbell about it, but in the power of this performative moment that now this will be a living thing. And we are doing that together at that moment, and I think that is sort of the unity that is, I think, unique to a purely theatrical experience.
I think that's right. I think like agreeing to use the imagination together is really what differentiates it from being in an audience watching a movie together.
Because the audience makes that contract too, right? Even with puppetry, especially with puppetry, they're not looking at the puppeteer; they're looking at the puppet because that is the performance.
It's funny. I keep thinking about, and this is help me because Misha and I have had this conversation before, and I'm gonna probably get it slightly wrong, so help me out. But it's also like we talked about digital theater and how all this has been happening. And I said at some point I was like, well, I don't want to watch theater from my living room or from my dining room, my kitchen table. And your response to that was, what if it's everyone's kitchen? Like, what if we're at everyone's kitchen table at the same time, right? Like, there is a way to expand, I guess. Misha's really influential to me in this one. Like, expanding the idea of the room, too, right? That it can be live, but it can be specific. And it can be this huge thing. But is there something that we expand into not just... I can't believe I'm saying this. Part of me is like, wow, COVID Heather cannot believe what's coming out of her mouth right now. But the idea that, like, we expand the idea of not just virtual, but... what's the word I'm not remembering? Not virtual, but...
Remote? No.
Not. What is the
tangible?
No.
Sorry.
Digital film.
Catch up, and I'll
immersive.
Okay.
You talk for a minute, and
But I think a lot of these conversations were sort of informed by like lessons that could be learned from the couple years that were sort of spent navigating the challenge. And I think the accessibility conversation is super important.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Is there a way to continue doing the work but make it accessible in ways that haven't been available to us before, or that we haven't considered. They've always been available, but we just haven't considered them. And then also realize that sometimes it creates opportunities in the way we tell stories. So just once we break out of the logistics, like to do serialized theater, how difficult that is to do in the more conventional models of producing, but being able to do that using some of the tools that we've just started unpacking. Let's just be like, we have not figured out how to use all these tools just yet. And so, I mean, as we are in the middle of it right now, like we're still sort of testing the grounds of what conversations can be. People are, sending questions to us in real time, right? Like, so in a way, it is a real moment. And then how to tell a story in a multi-platform way, a single story told over time, but in different mediums, right? And so I think the opportunities are actually quite out there. And to your question is like, what makes good theater? I think it's things that continue to engage with the audience on the topics that is affecting them, but also in the ways that they want to be engaged in. Right? Like, we experience the world in a different way now than we did even 3 years ago. Forget 50 years ago. To ignore those changes, I think, is irresponsible, because the final question, what is theater? It is, in my humble opinion, an important aspect of a healthy society. And so to engage with that society and the needs of that society is part of the work of theater as an art form.
I love that, and I like that because I was very reluctant to say at the beginning, like, theater should be doing this. I think that, like, as an artist, I feel that responsibility that it should be doing that, because I live it. I'm doing it. I'm giving the hours to it, and that's something that I would like to do in it. So I'm really glad that you said that to justify my statement before. I'm very curious, though. I've done during the pandemic, I did a lot of Zoom shows, and it felt great because I was doing something. And I was curious, like, from like a designer standpoint, because when you put on a show, you have the lights, you have the sound, you have all of these different aspects. But if everyone is in their living room, let's say COVID's back, everyone's in their living room, and you don't have control of my sound, or like the light coming into my room.
But you do.
But we do.
You have control over that.
We can control we can control part of it. We can control what they are experiencing while they're looking at you, right? We can augment. That's the word I was looking for everyone. It was augmented.
Yeah.
But like augmented, I'm obsessed a little bit like with augmented. Couldn't remember the word, but obsessed nonetheless.
Augmented reality.
Augmented realities, right? Like being able to like change the reality and shift it. I saw like some of the most amazing stuff virtually, and I saw some stuff that wasn't as great, that did not lean into all of what that version of experiencing theater, experiencing the story, could bring to us, as opposed to trying to figure out how to do the thing we always did. Right? It can't be the thing that we do.
I do think that's a very generous way of looking at it, and it's good to have a little bit of distance from that first year and change of trying to transition into peak pandemic art making, because a lot of the Zoom theater that I was seeing and also participating in had very much a we have theater at home kind of end result, and because we were all still dealing with the trauma and grief of not doing the thing that we wanted to get to be doing in the exact way we had been trained to do it, I think that people got disenchanted and wandered off very quickly in a way that hopefully they'll be revisiting more over the next couple of years in a lower pressure, different stakes kind of capacity to see if it can now be a yes and kind of addition to the things that we now have better access to in the return to post-pandemic in-person performance, post-peak pandemic in-person performance. Yeah. Still there.
But also I would add that it doesn't have to go into the high-tech Zoom world. Like one of the most effective pieces that I experienced and was partially, in some degree, part of, was a piece of theater was done through letter writing.
Okay.
So you would receive a letter, and you would write back, and you got a pen pal. But a story was actually told. A story began to emerge as part of this back and forth. And what was actually more brilliant about it is that story was actually part of a much larger story that has been told in multiple forms, both in immersive form, but also in a virtual form as well, from a number of different angles. So just like, if writers will sometimes have books where the characters reappear from a different vantage point, sometimes as the central character, sometimes as a secondary character. There are ways to sort of create work that engages with the same characters or with the same storyline, but from different angles. And they don't have to be high-tech or even involving your screen. Let's acknowledge part of that has been the fatigue of the screen, right? And so there are ways, people started experimenting and going back to site-specific theater, right? Like I think, and also acknowledging that that's what theater used to be. It used to be an outdoor experience, and that was perfected. And then we moved into the space. We started perfecting how to use the space, but now we can perhaps start engaging with other spaces, both physical and augmented and so forth.
Wow. I'm going to go to some of these questions, you guys, that our wonderful audience has sent us. This is from Hank in Chicago. What is a production that you didn't work on that fundamentally changed how you thought about theater in general or your particular craft inside theater? What is a production that you didn't work on that fundamentally changed how you thought about theater in general or your particular craft inside theater?
There's a version of that, like seeing it now as an adult, but there's also the thing I always say, like, it's the shows that you were like, I didn't know it could be that, right? The things that you're like, and I'm not going to lie, Cats was that for me when I was 14 years old, where I was like, they're dressed up like cats, and they're dancing, and there's scenery that is as big as me, and I saw, okay, because I'm going to age myself now. I saw the original production, not the original year, in London, though.
It ran a long time.
What?
It ran a long time.
It ran a long time. I was a teenager. It hadn't been that long. It was the 80s. But I saw it, and I remember, and then all the years go by, right? And you're like, I make theater now. And I kept being like, God, I remember that wrong, because there's no way that I remember it correctly. Because I remembered it correctly. Because the things I remembered didn't make sense. I was like, well, there would have to be entrances, and if there were entrances and there was scenery, then there's no... You literally walked into the theater, and you sat down on a turntable, and then the lights went to black, and I'm sure they were terrible, little lights of cat's eyes made out of whatever, flickered around the theater, and the audience actually turned on a turntable. And when you came up, and that's what I could never quite make sense. I was like, how did the turntable and the seating not get screwed up? See... I don't want to think about those things. But it really was this amazing thing because you came up and you were in this world. And for me, that was mind-blowing. And then I saw a Ping Chong piece when I was in college. Again, that was I didn't know it could be that thing, So those are mine. Now I went first because I was going to say Cats, and now everybody be much smarter than me. It won't be hard on that.
No. For me, I also have a youthful show, and then one that was more recent, but one from when I was growing up was Wicked. And the first time I heard that show, it inherently changed me because I heard people being loud singing like me. And before, I was just told that I was too loud. So that was a moment where I'm like, oh, people can get paid to sing loud like me. Okay. But seeing it live, and now as a director, growing up, I always wanted to be a performer. But I see the director in me becoming who she is. The first time I saw Wicked, that Defying Gravity moment, it truly changed my life. Like before Wicked and after Wicked, the way that is staged is so brilliant and really shifted. Yeah, it makes you shift how you think things can be done. And she flew in front of my eyes. I'm like, how was that possible? That's not real. And it was real and in front of my face, and that was theater. And the one more recently was Jesus Christ Superstar at the Lyric Opera. I feel like I've heard that show a million times. I've seen all the different recordings of it. And that staging was so beautiful and intense and violent, but without the violence. They used a lot of music analogies. So Judas hung himself with a microphone cord and dipped his hands into gold paint. So the rest of the show, his hands were gold, and it just really made me think how visually you could tell a story without relying only on the text, and how you can change that perspective.
Okay. Mine is another one of those youthful falling in love with theater kind of stories. So I was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, and stayed there for college. And I know, but I got out. It's okay.
No.
Houston.
I'm from Houston, and I went to college in Dallas.
What? Where did you go?
I went to SMU.
Wait, so did Ellie.
So did
Just,
I. Much earlier than you did, I'm guessing.
Crazy. Okay.
But my freshman year, one of the first things they said is be ready to move somewhere else when you graduate because there's not enough theater to sustain a career here. But I didn't know what I didn't know, and so I felt like I was floundering a lot, being like, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I guess I'll just go down there or something.
Yeah.
Because that's what I sounded like back then. But my sophomore year, the graduating class did a student project of Too Much Light Makes the Baby Go Blind. And that was a real light bulb moment for me because the baby went blind because of a light bulb, I guess. I'm losing the plot here. But just really falling in love with theater that was scrappy and very language-driven and very personal and wasn't just about the big companies in Dallas that had enough money to throw a helicopter on stage. It was really much more, it felt more organic and more earnest than the things that I had seen and felt like I was supposed to want. And so I started stockpiling sweaters my sophomore year of college, and now I'm here.
Were you finished?
Sure.
If you're not, go.
I don't think I have other stuff to say right now, but we've got more time.
Well, yeah. If you do, just throw it in.
Thanks.
My very first was when I was a kid. It was a stupid church Christmas show, and I remember this little girl being on stage. She was the star of the Christmas show, and I just remember being like, I want that power. I want that. And that was my introduction to I need to do this. And then I got into theater. And I think there are a few shows that come to mind. I really don't like musicals. I do think that they're wonderful.
Wow.
But musicals are my thing.
Trust me, mine either.
The cheese stands alone.
I remember if this helps, Carolina Change is my favorite musical. I've done work.
Good taste.
I remember that the Dallas Theater Center had a production of Crowns, which is about church hats, in the African American community. And for the longest time, I was like, ugh, I don't like this show. I don't like this show. I don't like this show. And at the very end, when all of the ladies, they have this final song, I forget what it's called, but they're walking up to heaven. And there's this scrim that goes up, and there's this brilliant, bright white light that, as it was being lifted up, and they're, walking and singing to heaven, I literally stood up. Aww. And I was just like, what? How did this do this to me? And, everyone else was standing up, and I was just like, that is incredible. I was not, it was a pretty good storyline, but it was just a moment where physically it was out of my body, like what was happening. Another is I saw Mary Zimmerman's Metamorphosis somehow when I was here, out of this world to me. And then I was doing this internship my senior year in college with the American Theater Wing, and I saw August Osage County on Broadway.
Never heard of it.
Nice.
And I was like, there is no way. I kept saying to myself, there's no way this story could get any sadder. And it was like, by the end, I was literally just like melting in my seat. And it was, and I'm kind of like a dick when it comes to things. I'm like, impress me. And just all of those were examples of just like, you physically are controlling me emotionally. Like, what are you doing? Like, how can you do this every single day? And then Mary Zimmerman's just, she does what she does. And yeah, those are my examples.
Well, since we're talking about like that childhood aha moment, I'm finding out a lot of it has to do with flight. I feel like a lot of people so I too had one of those. Midsummer's Night's Dream at the Guthrie.
Ooh.
Still in high school, and Puck comes down swinging from like some sort of contraption, and like and there's like hip hop music, and suddenly all these fairies are flying everywhere, and there's battle sequences. I was like, oh, this is what Shakespeare could be like. Like, it sort of opened up my eyes that things can be much more unexpected. So that I definitely was an important moment. But I think a more recent one was a production of oh my God, I think it was called Ojos, and it is a semi-immersive piece where the audience is taken on a journey, but they're blindfolded the entire time, and you take in to all these different places, and but this is what got amazing, like there's sound, but also smell. And also movement. So at one point, you're on a rickshaw in Mumbai, and you can smell it, you can hear it, and then you're suddenly at a party, and people know your name, and before I know it, I'm giving somebody relationship advice, and then I'm playing the piano. Like, it was, and you spend this, I don't know, it seemed like a lifetime. And at one point, you're given the opportunity, you're instructed to take off your blindfolds. And then you get to sit with a person who is actually blind, and they tell you the story of how they were losing their sight. And you get to sort of reflect on that. And then you put your blindfold back on, and you spend another lifetime, but now from a completely different perspective. But I got to go back and see what it was. And it wasn't a room much bigger than this, with duct tape and like sticks and like a couple speakers and a couple microphones. And the most important piece of scenery is that we finally went outside, and we got to sort of be outside. And so, I think I'm still attached to this idea that it doesn't have to be high tech, I think, as for it to be just completely transformative and transportive. So.
That was awesome, you guys. I should have been queuing up the next question.
I have one little story while you do that. That's totally related to like the first. I just love this story. When I was in junior high, I didn't do high school theater. I didn't do it till college. But when I was in junior high, I loved to go see the really great theater at my high school. And they did Merrily We Roll Along. And they probably did it like 6 months after it tanked on Broadway the first time. And I loved it so much. And it was the best thing I ever saw. And it was like, and I told people about it forever. And like, it is like this, and it was so good, y'all. And last fall, and I am in my 50s, last fall, oh God, I said it out loud, which makes it true, Hank. I went to see I did a show in New York, and the music director's friend came as his guest to the opening gala thing that we had. And we were talking, and we did the thing that we just did, where we were like, I'm from Texas. And then we did what I'm going to do to you after this, which is say, where'd you go to high school? Because that's what Texans do. And I said, where'd you go to high school? And this guy was like, I went to high school at the high school next to mine. And I was like, oh my God. And we had a little freak out moment. And then he said, did you do theater? And I said, no. He was a couple years older than me. And he was like, he's like a big fancy music director now. And he was like, I used to come over and do shows at your high school, though, sometimes. And I was like, did you do Merrily We Roll Along? And he said, yes. And I said, was it good? And he said, yes. Yes! And that's my story. I almost lost my mind.
That's awesome.
That is awesome.
It was really good. It was really great. And then we talked about Stacey Pappas, who was brilliant in it. So...
Chase, this one's coming from you. This is like a leap.
Oh, gosh.
Outside of money, what is the biggest challenge the community is facing? Outside of money, what is the biggest challenge, in your opinion, that the theater community is facing? Right. See attached essay.
Yeah, oh my gosh. I think we're still tackling inclusion and diversity in all forms. I think just like pure access, which I guess like is tied to money, is what is difficult for artists that we haven't seen. Getting them to a spot where they can be a part of non-union theater, I think is a huge hurdle. So it's not because we don't want to see those voices, but I think that we are struggling to help those voices get to a place where they can join us. I think that's a huge part of it right now.
It does feel like everything's connected to money because money is what governs so many resources. But I feel like a lot of the burnout and anxiety and toxicity that I see even before we start tackling how to get more people into the rooms that haven't had opportunities in those rooms is the manufactured urgency that we've had through tightly packed obligatory programs for production seasons. And just like pushing things off until the very last minute or like making as few numbers of rehearsals as possible or having like super tight, like boom and done kind of contracts or like show programs. I just really want us to have more opportunities for slow theater where like people know what shows they're going to be working on and can be excited about for maybe even 6 months or a year and aren't rehearsing every single day for 4 weeks. They're instead rehearsing 3 days for 8 weeks. And if there are other companies that are embracing the same kind of model, then maybe you are rehearsing every day, but it's for multiple projects. And so then they can also be cross-pollinating where you are as an artist. And so you're still getting to take time and make educated and informed consensual choices about the work that you're doing.
I think thank you. I think I'm having like the same problem that I think like what I would consider an audience to be having, like people who coming to see the theater, and in the same way that I am reluctant to like be in a show or to commit to time, I'm really like getting under what's underneath that. I feel like I'm mentally myself controlling what needs to be seen, what should be seen, and what is important to be seen. And I definitely think that, you know, certainly any voice that has been subjugated in the past, certainly black voices and queer voices like myself, I want those to be, seen, but it's also very difficult for me because there isn't enough of that. So, I find myself saying, well, I'm not going to do anything because that's not because I really want to use my voice in this because this is where I find my power. And I find myself not doing as much as I used to if I were if I was just saying yes to every project. And it feels like I'm being defiant and I'm like standing up for things, but standing up for something, but ultimately I'm not doing anything. And that, becomes, and it's just a weird sort of masochism that, oh my God, just doesn't feel enjoyable. This sounds very sad. But I think that outside of money, I really, I'm like at a point in my process in the theater where it's okay to have an ego that what I want to see should be on stage, whereas like I feel like it has always been someone else is deciding that for me, and I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
I want better for you.
Thank you. Yeah, me too. Yeah, that's where I feel like I am.
I have to say, I struggle because I tie everything back to money in my head. I'm like, if we had more money, we would have more time. If we had more money, we would be able to have access. You know what I mean? Like, there's just so much of it that's like the capitalism of the world that we live in is just really dictating so much of the world that we make, the theater, the world in which we make theater. And so it's a struggle for me to think outside of that.
Yeah, and for me, this issue seems insurmountable, but it even sort of exists outside of the money thing, which is it's America's relationship with theater is what's informing a lot of this. It informs the way theater is funded, the way theater is taught, and then the way theater is consumed. And when we bring it back to the very first question, that it is about a communal experience, it's about a dialogue with the audience. Unfortunately, the way the system works right now, it doesn't provide those opportunities in a true, genuine way. It doesn't speak too much of to the populace, but also there's not an expectation for it to engage with us. The industry has become insular, both as a defense mechanism, but also as a level of elitism that I think starts way early.
Yeah.
And so, if to bring it back to something a little bit more pragmatic, and we talk a lot about this. I've started teaching with Hedda at Columbia, and that laughter.
In the same classroom.
Yes.
At the same time.
Yes.
Twice a week.
That I think perhaps re-examining the way education in theater is approached.
Oh, yes.
And I don't necessarily have an answer to what it should be, but I see that certain patterns get established at a time when really we have perfect opportunities to establish completely brand new approaches. Absolutely. And certainly try it. Like the stakes seems to be both the highest and also the lowest to try out some different models.
It's funny. Yesterday, I had a guest in one of my classes who said to my students, "Don't listen to her. Do whatever you want." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, I really was like, "Yeah, good point." Like, do what you want. You know, like try it. It may be wrong, but who cares right now?
I think something that we're dealing with in Chicago specifically right now is a lot of oversaturation. I think we had a lot of people migrate to the city, and it was more than those that left. And I think that all of those people or people that have been here that are not getting work at other companies have sprouted new companies. So it feels like there's a lot of competition for jobs that just don't exist. I didn't, when I was 5 years old, I didn't grow up thinking like, I'm going to be a casting director at non-union theaters. Like, I didn't know that job existed, but I want to be an artist and I want to make theater. And that was a hat I, made myself and put on me. And I think that other artists are learning to do that, to wear multiple hats. But I think that that is also an issue not an issue, just something that we are dealing with in Chicago. There are too many actors for roles. There are too many directors for jobs and designers. It's just, we're overwhelmed with talent, which in some cases is a boon, but when you're casting or when you're a director, it feels difficult.
I feel like space, access to space is probably one of the biggest issues there, because I do really like one of the things that we see in Chicago. One of the basis for theater companies being formed in the first place is people saying, I'm not getting to do the work I want there. I will make my own opportunities, being makers instead of takers. And I do think that that insularity also can be a big challenge to the opportunities. People will go with the folks that they know already. And I don't know if I agree with the too many people argument.
Well, we don't have to agree.
Although, if I may sort of just push back a little bit specifically on this idea, this notion's I don't get to do the work that I want to be doing, so therefore I will form my own to do this. That, I think, it's not inherently a noble thing.
No, I
Right?
agree with you there. Very
And-
few people start theater companies because they want to run theater companies.
Yeah, but what I'm getting at is also no other industry behaves that way. And it comes from a place of, again, if we are about the audience, let's talk about the audience, let's think about the audience and figure out what is the need there.
What am I trying to say?
Yes,
Yes.
or what do they need to hear? And I'm not saying what do they need to see, what is the most selling thing, what is the conversation that is not happening versus I want to be the next Steppenwolf. And I'm being super mean and generalist about it, but the number of new companies dedicated to ensemble theater and new work that form in Chicago and every year is an irresponsible way of approaching such a fragile industry to begin with.
Is that still the case? And that is an honest question born out of perhaps my own naivete about where we are at this point.
It is
Yes.
often, especially in every year out of a college,
Yeah,
they'll form a new company,
that's true.
which is you don't graduate from law school and start a law firm, right? That's just not how things can work. But sometimes, I mean, and honestly, just because of the work that we've done together, Wild Claw is actually a great example of a company that came and sort of observed the landscape and realized there is an opening here for the work that is not happening. And I would say, especially in the beginning, it paid off. There was a hunger and an audience for that for that kind of storytelling. And it's not everyone's thing. I'm with you. I'm musicals. I love music. I do music. I've written a musical for Strawdog. But I'm not sure I love musicals yet. But it's not but for some people, that's the thing. And for other people, it is something else. And so figuring out what is the way that people want to be engaged with and the conversations they want to have And also, I mean, I agree, there's a saturation, but there are plenty of communities out there who actually do need, there is a hunger there. And if you're a firm believer in the nobility of the cause, you go where the work is, not where the prestige is or the friends are. So that's part of it, deciding, is it about the work or is it about the scene and about sort of the lifestyle?
Yeah, is it about the ego? Because
Yes.
you could very quickly say, why not? If you have the opportunity, whether it's the best thing to do or not, why not? Why not do it? But I really, really did like what you just said, and I'm gonna try to cleverly segue that into this question. if it is something that let's just say us as a collective deem as, yes, this needs to be told, we don't have the space. Is streaming that story a viable option?
I mean, I think it depends on the story, right?
Yes.
The story informs
The medium.
the medium.
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
always have to
Medium.
justify where and how.
So it
that
has to be
show-
specific.
I think.
You think?
I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
There was another question about what was sort of the pushback against a lot of the sort of the virtual or Zoom-based theater, and a lot of it is trying to put the square peg in the round hole, those plays or those scripts were not written to be consumed in that way. Right? I ended up doing a lot of audio plays. Listen, I love audio plays. This is what I do now. I do a lot of that kind of work. But there's plenty of times where I come across a script and I say, this is not meant to be consumed in that way. It is actually you're doing both a disservice to the story and to the listener by trying to to force it that way. And you're missing opportunities to actually lean into. Every medium has a strength and its weaknesses. Too often we get bottlenecked by the weaknesses when really we should be going after the strengths that are not available to us. We're talking about theater versus movies. Movies are really good at doing special effects, right? They are able to, the magic of sleight of hand is just much more effective most of the time. But what they can't do is get up from your seat, right?
Yeah.
At that moment, right? They just that doesn't happen as much. And then the same thing, audio plays are really bad at telling stories that require visual components, but they're really good to talking to a single person at a time, right? And so the question is, it's not just streaming. The answer is finding ways, and especially if this is not the venue, creating content that could reach other people, or creating content that then could be done in those places that need, And it's not a new idea. Playwrights have written plays to be performed,
Right.
either simultaneously by multiple ensembles, or Anyways, too many options, I think.
What if you feel that, although it may not be the best avenue to tell that story, it is more important that the story reaches a lot of people? What if, there was a school in some remote part of wherever, that could use this story being told, even though they may not have seen it live, I may have, and may not have gotten to stand up in the same way as that it moved me, but they got to hear the story. Is that less effective because it's on video or streamed?
Well, I think you have to make it effective.
Yeah.
I think you
Yes.
have
Yeah.
to then take that, whatever that story is that you want to tell, what is that thing? And make sure that the way you are telling it, sharing it, showing it, audio, whatever it is, that you're using the most effective tools that you have to access.
It's not
that
a one-to-one
audience.
translation.
Yeah.
Now, that said, yes, I watched a ton of stuff over the over the pandemic that was like streaming from Germany in my nerdy way when I was like, look at all these German plays. I'm going to be sad for a little while. But I watched them and like, yeah, some kid in Oklahoma also could see those, and they can't always see those. The National Theater in London is doing the National. They've opened it up from just National Theater Live in the movie theaters to National Theater at home, and you can watch those things. I think there's definitely service in that because it does access these kids, and they get to see the kinds of things that they wouldn't necessarily. I mean, and most of our stories were, I will point out, like from our chat, we did a lot of like, these things affected me, and that was access. We all had access to that.
Yep.
So I think that it's really, you know, to find a way to let kids today see that stuff, or people in other places who just don't even know we're out here doing this, you know, have never experienced it.
But also
there's a value in that.
Yeah. Well, and I think that with those streaming opportunities, they didn't adjust the script to be on Zoom squares. It was clearly a filmed version of a stage show. So you got to hear an audience's reactions. You got to, you know, see from different angles. So it's like a hybrid between movie and theater, but they weren't trying to adapt it to fit a Zoom like tile grid. They were clear about the medium that they were using, which was filmed theater, which I think is its own beast.
Awesome. All right, let's see. We probably have time for one more question.
No pressure. Pick the best one.
Dang.
So we've got we you know, I was supposed to ask you guys to do this much earlier, but the next time we're on, just vote for important questions. You know, make me ask these questions. I was kind of getting lost in what these were. How do you this is from Becca, actually.
I was like, Becca just asked.
How do you
Twist.
How do you factor in an audience while making theater? How do you factor in an audience when making theater? I think that's a very important question.
I agree. I good job, Becca. Well, I think I direct primarily comedies where the audience is the other actor in our show. Like, things aren't funny if you don't have people laugh at them, I guess. Maybe that's a little generalized, but when I am directing, particularly comedy, I am always thinking about how someone will hear it, how someone will see it, and what someone will think is funny. And that someone could look like me, that someone could look like any of us on this panel. But comedy is very human. And so that is a part of my process from the very beginning. What do people find funny?
A lot of what excites me about my work in live Foley performance and choreography stems from what I was saying about how saturated our vocabulary is with narrative. The more familiar you are with the what of a story, the more risk you get to take with how that story unfolds. And there are a lot of conventions in stage Foley that can benefit that way. Like the way that we're revealing props is something I am always very excited about when I'm presenting something that is about to make a sound that the audience has been anticipating for a while, that can help them. I feel like seeing the physical object that's going to be creating a sound, especially if it's found object related, if it's not actually the thing that normally makes the sound of the thing in day-to-day life, I think it tickles the same kind of the brain that gets excited by wordplay. It forces something familiar into a new context and therefore makes us more imaginative in the process. A lot of my work has been in horror and in comedy, and so an example that I always really like is a friend of mine wrote a play called Earwigs. So it's based on the urban legend of how earwigs crawl in your ear and lay eggs in your head. And so we've got this character. Sorry, most of my best stories are gross. But we've got this character that's been complaining about a headache for several pages now, so the audience knows something's coming. And so we transition from real time, this character screaming in pain, to the narrator saying, and then it happened. And so the presentation for me at this point was taking off a formal shrug and putting on an apron, coming around in front of the table where all of our props have been strewn this whole time, and unveiling a pumpkin and pulling out a brick. And so the sound, step by step of the sound breakdown we're going for is the sound of the exploding skull, the gush of the brain matter, and the cascading of thousands of insects. And so to break that down, we have the smash of a brick on a pumpkin. We have one of those big ass car sponges that's being wrung out for the gush of the brain squishing. And then we have a 6-foot long rain stick that's being shunked to the ground really quickly. So it's that loud shh kind of scuttling of sound of insects. And there are a lot of ways that this plays with the audience. For one thing, seeing the pumpkin a little bit before the actual smashing occurs helps build the anticipation of that smash. This is also an extension of the idea of proxy in puppetry, which can be distilled in the quote, if an audience sees me strike a child on stage, they are seeing me strike just that child. But if an audience sees me strike a puppet child on stage, they're seeing me strike all children. So that means that the audience has an easier time translating personal experience onto something that's a little bit more vague in its shape and not immediately recognizable as a specific. So it becomes more universal by being a little bit more vague. So that pumpkin can be a little bit more like emotionally invested by the audience. And the size of the rain stick benefits this as well, because you could probably get the same sound effectively out of a smaller rain stick, but simply having one that much larger also can trigger the audience to thinking, my God, there must be millions of them. So the combination of all these things working together plays on the sound and the narrative and an audience catharsis in a way that I find really exciting and satisfying.
So is that process then figuring out what sound you want and then how the showmanship comes into it?
Yeah, typically I'm breaking it down by hearing the sound in my head as I'm reading a script and apportioning props that I think are good candidates for creating that sound, a little bit of trial and error, and then building choreography out of that based on rehearsal with the voice actors. So I'm finessing the timing of when I want these reveals, so they'll be building anticipation instead of spoilering an effect for the audience. So it is very much about timing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you guys quickly want to say something about?
I can be real quick. I just think about the physical proximity of the actor to the audience. That's what I usually think about, how close they are to them.
And yeah, similar to me, I in my process often try to put myself literally where the audience is. So I try to sit in as many seats as possible to actually experience it. Make it really annoying for fellow audience members, but to really sort of understand their perspective from that. It's now has expanded to me like listening to work in every possible situations, in the car, while doing the dishes, while biking, trying to sort of understand how is it consumed by the end receiver of the work. So walk a mile in their headphones, I think.
All right, well, thank you guys for being a part of this Chicago edition of Thank You 5. It was very, very cool to hear you guys talk. We all like talking about theater.
Yes.
And Strawdog wants to just give out a few thank yous to the DVE store, officehours.global, Edwin Ruiz, Heath Hayes, and Laura Thompson. Any of you guys out watching there, you guys out here at Berks chilling with us, we definitely want to give you guys thanks. And if you want to be a part of it, go to strawdog.org and check out the Thank You 5 and request to be on it, because every voice should be heard. We definitely believe that. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.
So yeah, we need to bring her in to teach the class.
so sorry. I talked too long. I didn't realize that.
No.
Okay.
Thank you. Don't apologize to me. Yeah.
I was like, follow up?
I will, yeah.